Hey, what's up everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to Get Hit with the Truth. So today we're doing the 2022 end of year champions report, and this is going to be on the IBF, the International Boxing Federation world titles, all the way from 122 pounds to heavyweight. That's 12 different divisions. We're going to discuss what happened with all those titles and what we can look forward to in 2023. So let's jump into it and start with the 122-pound super bantamweight division. Undefeated Marajan Akhmadaliyev entered the year as the IBF and the WBA unified champion. In June, he would make a mandatory defense against his WBA mandatory challenger, Ronnie Rios. And it was somewhat competitive, but for the most part, MJ, which is Akhmadaliyev, dominated the action, and you know, even broke his hand in the process, but still well ahead on the scorecards, went after the knockout in the 12th round, and he finished the always tough Rios. And that was pretty impressive as he retained his unified title. But the broken hand really cost him for the rest of the year. He would not fight for the remainder of the year. And now he's heading into 2023, where the IBF has ordered him to make a mandatory defense against Marlon Tapalis, a former world title challenger. That fight looks like it's going to happen for sure, but they gave him another 2-week extension to before the fight goes to a purse bid. But I don't think it should be an issue to get this fight done. I mean, it is a mandatory fight, so they have to get it done. I think MJ is going to dominate, you know, Tapalis, stopping him in probably the later rounds and retaining his unified titles again. After that, it's kind of up in the air what he decides to do, you know, with Naoya Inoue moving up into the division. Most likely, he's the undisputed champ at 118. And Stephen Fulton, not quite sure what he wants to do yet. I mean, he has the option, and he's been ordered to move up to 126 and fight Brandon Figueroa in a rematch for the WBC interim title there, but we have not got a confirmation of that fight taking place. So we got to wait and see. It's kind of up in the air. If he doesn't get Inoue or Fulton, which I'm saying it's on the, you know, on the lesser side of 50-50, then I think it's he might fight his WBA mandatory in the second half of the year and have an ASEAN finally. So we'll see what goes down. But that's 122 as MJ heads into another year as champion. 126 featherweight. Entering the year was Kiko Martinez, coming off of his upset knockout victory over Kid Galahad. He entered the year as the world champion. And in March, he signed on for a rematch with former champion Josh Warrington. Warrington and him had fought in 2017, and Warrington got out of there with a very close, disputed majority decision. This time around, after coming off that knockout win over Galahad, he was very confident, but Warrington fought on another level in this fight. It might have been his overall best performance, as he just dominated and beat up the veteran Kiko Martinez, stopping him in 7 rounds as he regained the IBF title. Then in December, Warrington would make a mandatory defense against Luis Alberto Lopez. And for the first probably 8 rounds, it looked like Lopez was in solid control. And then Warrington turned it on the last 4 rounds and almost stopped Lopez, but it was too little too late. He lost a close majority decision in his home country, and Luis Alberto Lopez became the new IBF champion impressively. Lopez has already ruled out a rematch with Warrington due to fouls and stuff. There was no rematch clause in the contract. And Bob Arum, which is Lopez's promoter in Top Rank, has made it clear that he wants to make Lopez and Michael Conlan for the IBF title. So I think Lopez is going to fight Conlan. I think that's about a 50-50 fight. I really don't know which one to pick. And after that, it's kind of up in the air. You have other top ranked guys potentially fighting for the vacant belts. So again, I think there are going to be other good options at 126 for Lopez or Conlan, whoever comes out of that one. as the IBF champion. 130 super featherweight, entering the year as champ was Kenichi Ogawa, as he had captured the vacant title, defeating Azinga Fazil earlier, or in November of 2021. Well, in June, he would make a defense, an optional defense against undefeated Joe Cordina, ahead of a mandatory fight with Shavkat Rakhimov. And surprisingly, Joe Cordina, who's not known for his big punching power, knocked Ogawa out in a knockout of the year candidate, knocked him out cold in the second round, and captured the IBF title in an upset. Then Cordina was set to make a mandatory defense against Shavkat Rakhimov in November on the Bivol Ramirez undercard, but he had to pull out with an injury, and because Rakhimov was the first of 2 mandatory challengers for that belt, they would strip Cordina of the belt and would order Rakhimov and Zelfa Barrett, who is the next mandatory, to fight for the vacant title. In November, on the same card, they would get together. Barrett surprisingly knocked Rakhimov down early and was actually winning the fight, but Rakhimov kept grinding and pressing, and finally Rakhimov got to him, knocked out Zelfa Barrett in the 9th round, and is now your IBF champion. But the IBF prior to that ordered the winner of Rakhimov and Barrett to fight Joe Cordina next. So Joe Cordina looks like he's lined up to fight Shavkat Rakhimov. Personally, I think Rakhimov is going to beat Joe Cordina and stay undefeated and keep the title. And then from there, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of up in the air what Rakhimov could do. But pretty excited to see Rakhimov in there, and I'm glad he is a world champion because he's an all-action guy. 135 lightweight. George Kambosos Jr. entered the year as the IBF and unified lightweight champion of the world after he had upset Teofimo Lopez in November of 2021 to capture the unified title. He was supposed to fight Vasily Lomachenko. That fight fell through when Lomachenko went to fight in the war effort against Russia for his native Ukraine. So after that, Devin Haney stepped in and stepped up to the plate as he was a WBC champion, and him and Kambosos would lock horns in June on ESPN for the Undisputed Lightweight Championship. And Devin Haney went in there on enemy territory and scored a very convincing 12-round unanimous decision. But Kambosos had an automatic rematch clause in the contract, which he invoked. And in October on ESPN, they would rematch. This time, Haney would dominate him even more so, almost a damn near shutout unanimous decision, as he just completely dominated and beat up the former champ Kambosos, as he retained the IBF and Undisputed title. Now, heading into 2023, he holds all 4 belts, and the plan right now is for Haney to likely fight Vasily Lomachenko. That there's a very strong chance those 2 guys fight. If that fight goes down, I think Lomachenko wins, but I definitely think Haney has a chance to pull off the victory. Either way, it's up in the air what the winner does in the second half of the year. There are many options out there, but mandatories are going to be looming, and you know, I think it's likely the winner vacates a belt or 2. And if Gervonta Tank Davis knocks out Ryan Garcia, I think there's a very good chance that he would fight the winner of this fight in a mandatory fight, as Tank is already the WBA regular champion at 135, anyways. So, but we got to wait and see. We got to wait and see what unfolds, what happens there. Personally, I think Tank's going to lose to Ryan, and I think Vasily is going to beat Devin Haney, but you never know. We'll see. 140, junior welterweight. Josh Taylor entered the year as the IBF and Undisputed champion overall. He had all 4 belts. And in February, he would make a mandatory defense of his belt against undefeated WBO mandatory challenger Jack Catterall of the United Kingdom. This fight was supposed to be a wash. Taylor was supposed to dominate, and he did not. He actually probably should have lost the fight. He got knocked down. It was close, but when it went to the scorecards, they scored it a split decision, a controversial split decision for Taylor, as he would retain all 4 belts. Taylor at the time wanted to vacate and move up to 147, but he got so much backlash from his own country and fans that he decided to stay at 140, but he would give up 3 of his 4 belts over the span of a couple months, and one of them was the IBF title. Then Jeremiah Ponce, the #1 contender, was ordered to fight Subriel Matias. They were supposed to fight on the Wilder and Hellenius undercard, but Ponce had visa issues, or Matias did, one of them, and they couldn't get the fight to happen. So they ended up, they couldn't get the fight to happen, so they ended up not fighting. And you know, the fight is still supposed to go on. The belt is still vacant at the end of the year. The title fight is still supposed to happen between Matias and Ponce. And I personally think Matias is going to win that fight. And if he does, there could be a unification bout in the second half of the year with Gary Antoine Russell. Because Russell's fighting Ishmael Barroso, well, he's likely going to be fighting Alberto Puello, the new WBA champion. He would be the favorite there. And if he wins, the winner has to fight Ishmael Barroso, and I think he would win that. And I damn sure could see a big PBC title unification bout in the second half of the year between Gary Antoine Russell and Subriel Matias. But we'll see what happens with the Matias-Ponce fight first. 147, welterweight. Undefeated Errol Spence Jr. entered the year as the IBF and unified welterweight champion of the world, as he had both the IBF and WBC belts. In April, he wanted to unify more as he took on WBA champion, super champion Yordenis Ugas, who had defeated Manny Pacquiao. In this one, outside of one punch that knocked Spence off guard, he completely and utterly dominated Ugas over the fight, course of the fight, broke him down, beat him up, and finally beat to shit Ugas. Was done in the 10th round as Spence added a third belt to his arsenal as the unified welterweight champion of the world. The rest of the year, he tried to lock down an undisputed title showdown with Terrence Crawford. That didn't happen, sadly. It almost came to fruition, but did not happen. And now Spence has been ordered by the WBC to face their mandatory challenger and former unified champ Keith Thurman. But Spence just came out a few days ago and said that he has plenty of options. And just last weekend on Showtime, he mentioned that he'll be returning in likely April, May, or June. And he left it open that the fight with Crawford is still a viable option. If that's going to happen, it has to happen next, absolutely, because it would not be for Undisputed if it does not happen next. If this stretches to the second half of the year, if they fight, it will not be for Undisputed, because mandatories are looming right now, especially the IBF mandatory, as Jerron Boots Ennis is competing for the interim title on the Gervonta Davis undercard, and I think he's going to win that. And if he does, he's going to be lined up to fight Spence. One way or the other, if Spence fights Crawford, I think Crawford beats Spence, and then I don't think Crawford's going to end up fighting Jerron Boots Ennis, but you never know. We'll see what happens, how everything shakes out for the IBF title at welterweight. 154, the champion there is Jermell Charlo. He's the IBF and Undisputed champion. He entered the year that way. And in May, he attempted to become the Undisputed champion when he took on undefeated Brian Castaño. He dominated Castaño. Well, no, he didn't dominate Castaño, but he scored a hard-fought 10th round knockout win in their rematch as he became the Undisputed champion. Made history with that. It was very, very impressive. Following the victory, though, he did not fight the remainder of the year, but he has his first fight of 2023 lined up, as he'll defend the IBF and Undisputed title against undefeated WBO mandatory challenger Tim Tszyu of Australia. This is a good matchup right here and a good fight. I think Charlo's going to win this fight. I think he's going to knock out Tszyu. I think Tszyu does have a puncher's chance, though, but after that, it's kind of up in the air what he's going to do. I wouldn't be surprised if he gives up 1 or 2 belts, because he does have mandatories looming, but we're not sure which ones. There's the IBF title could be one of the belts that he keeps, because his opponent, you know, he'd be a favorite over him. But does he want a bigger fight than that? Does he want to move up to 160? And I think that's a viable option at some point. So I'm saying it's probably a better than 50% chance that Charlo is not going to be your champ by the end of the year, and he'll be moving up to 160, in my opinion, or vacating a couple of the belts. 160 middleweight, the IBF champion entering the year was the veteran Hall of Famer Triple G Gennady Golovkin. He entered the year. He entered the year as champ, and in April he signed on after almost a year and a half off to take on WBA champion Ryota Murata of Japan in a unification bout. Triple G, impressively, in the first 5 rounds, it was very competitive. They were going back and forth, trading. It was a good fight, but Triple G kept grinding at his age, and he broke down Murata and impressively stopped him in the 9th round of that fight as he took over after the 5th round, and he unified the 2 championships. Now, he ended up moving up to 168 to fight Canelo Alvarez in their 3rd fight in September, so he did not defend the title the rest of the year. He would lose that bout, but he did remind everybody at the end of the fight that he did want to still fight, and he was still a champion. So, the WBA then ordered him to fight regular champion Arislan Lara, but then the IBF came in and reminded everybody that they have priority on mandatories over the WBA. So, Triple G is supposed to be fighting undefeated Esquiva Falcao, the IBF mandatory #1 challenger from Brazil. Now, if he takes that fight, after that he would have to fight Arislan Lara. I think both of those are very winnable fights for Triple G, even at his age. And unless he's trying to get a Jaime Munguia fight or a bigger fight that comes up, I think he should just follow through and fight Falcao first, and then see how everything plays out after that, because a showdown with Arislan Lara isn't a bad matchup. Lara does have a name, and it would be fun, and Lara might be coming off of a win over Danny Garcia, because there's talks about Lara and Danny Garcia fighting next, so we'll see. 168 super middleweight, Canelo Alvarez entered the year as the IBF and undisputed champion, as he became the undisputed champ in November of 2021. He would move up to 175 in May and challenge for the light heavyweight title, coming up short. Then in September, he would move back down to 168 and defend his undisputed title against unified middleweight champ Triple G Gennady Golovkin in their 3rd fight. He would win that fight by convincing unanimous decision, and now it's unclear, but it looks like he's going to be returning in May and fighting his WBO interim champion and mandatory John Ryder of the United Kingdom. He's looking at that as a tune-up bout ahead of a potential rematch with Dimitri Bivol in September. If that's how he plays out his year, I'm not sure, after he were to beat Ryder, which I believe he would, I'm not sure how long he holds on to the IBF or any of his world titles at 168. So it's really up in the air. We got to see how all of that plays out. I think it's about 50-50 that he's still champ by the end of the year. I think 168, in terms of being his best division, that's probably the highest he can compete to be super competitive and be, you know, a dominant figure. But it's up to Canelo. We'll see if he still has that belt at the end of the year. He doesn't have a mandatory due either, not yet, so we're not sure what the IBF is planning on doing with Canelo. 175, undefeated Arthur Beterbiev entered the year as the IBF and unified light heavyweight champion of the world. He had both the IBF and WBC belts. In June, he decided that he wanted to unify again and take on Joe Smith Jr., the WBO champion. And on ESPN, they would lock horns. It was Beterbiev came in the favorite, expect to be a slugfest, but he hurt Smith badly in the 1st round and finished him in the 2nd round as he unified the unified 3 of the 4 belts in the division, and he ended up not fighting the remainder of the year, as he was set to fight his WBO mandatory challenger Anthony Yarde, but had to pull out with an injury. So now him and Yarde are set to collide on Saturday, January 28th in the main event of an ESPN card. I think Yarde has a good puncher's chance, but I still think Beterbiev is going to knock Yarde out and retain his 3 of his 4 belts. After that, it's up in the air what he decides to do or what happens. We know Callum Smith is looming as a mandatory, but we also know an undisputed title clash with Dimitri Bivol is possible. But with Bivol potentially fighting Canelo again in September, we really don't know how all that's going to shake out. So I'm very curious in seeing what happens here. If Beterbiev is going to get him, you know, get Bivol in the ring, or if he's going to fight Callum Smith. Going to be very interesting to see what happens for Beterbiev after the fight with Anthony Yard in January, which should be pretty entertaining. Cruiserweight, 200 pounds. Maris Bradis entered the year as the reigning IBF champion. He was the #1 cruiserweight in the world. He waited around until July to make a mandatory defense against Jai Opetaia, who was undefeated. Opetaia had not beaten anybody significant to that point, but surprisingly, he outworked and outboxed the veteran and reigning champ Bradis, completely schooling him to a 12-round unanimous decision. He hurt his hand in the fight, though, and did not fight the remainder of the year. Right now, they're talking about him potentially making a mandatory against Mateusz Masternak, who's his #1 contender. And there's also guys like Chris Billum Smith calling him out. So it's up in the air, but Opetaia, big time win. We'll see what he decides to do next. Impressive performance, though. Heavyweight. Alexander Usyk entered the year as the undefeated and unified heavyweight champion of the world. He held the IBF, WBO, and WBA super title after he had defeated Anthony Joshua in 2021. Well, the Joshua rematch, automatic rematch clause was looming. It lingered a little bit. Finally, it came to fruition in August on DAZN, and Usyk had a tougher time the second time around, but he still got out of there with a convincing 12-round unanimous decision, or split decision in this one, as he deservingly got the win and is still the unified champ. He wanted to fight Tyson Fury in December, but it wasn't enough time for him to recover from the Joshua fight, so he opted instead to fight Fury early this year, and now they're in serious talks to fight each other for the undisputed championship. If that fight comes to fruition, and I think it will for all 4 belts, I think Tyson Fury is going to beat Alexander Usyk and capture all 4 belts and become the undisputed champ. After that, it's up in the air if Fury holds on to the IBF title. His IBF mandatory is Filip Hrgović, and that's probably the least attractive mandatory of the 4 belts. But here's the thing, all 4 belts are going to have mandatories, dude. You know, so I personally believe Fury, if he beats Usyk, is going to either want to fight Anthony Joshua in the second half of the year, or better yet, make his WBC mandatory defense against the winner of Deontay Wilder and Andy Ruiz Jr., which I think is going to be Wilder, as they would lock horns for a 4th time. So we got to see what happens. We got to see what comes out of the heavyweight division with the IBF title. But that first fight for undisputed should be happening, so everybody should be excited. So that's it. That's what I got. That is the end of the year champions report for the IBF world titles from 122 all the way to heavyweight. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, smash the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate any and all support. This is True Boxing. You've been hit with the truth.